Hi everyone, this is the Ops Cross Page Think Big. Today is May 20th, and we're here today to discuss a cross topic discussion point that is to provide our users with a way to test their pipeline locally. So today's facilitator, well, I'm the facilitator, but the topic today is going to be posed by Darren. So Darren, why don't you take over and talk to us about the problem statement, the job to be done a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, both Darren and Dov, to be honest. I think we both kind of like had collaborated on this
Yes.
in the beginning. I think Dov actually put in the first bullet. So Dov, do you want to speak to your bullet or do you want to jump and cover my bullet first in
Yeah,
terms of?
yeah, I think I just wanted the first bullet was just like the high level what users are asking, and I think the next one are you elaborating on like why. So I'm just gonna read it like the user would our users, and this is a common request that I keep getting. They ask me for a way to run. Basically, they ask for a test, but they actually want to run their CI pipeline locally. So as they work on their like local Git, they are doing changes to the pipeline. They want to test or run the pipeline to see if it's working without pushing any changes to like the remote Git, which trigger like our CI workflow, and here then you actually explain like why. So it's like you can take over now.
Yeah, that's basically it. So, you know, when a user is, as we can and with define user, but creating or changing a pipeline, um, they don't necessarily are going to get everything right the first time. Like we all, if it's a simple pipeline, then yeah, but maybe it's about something more complex, then probably no. So, like any part of the developer's job, working with a pipeline really and getting a pipeline right is a trial and error process. And so, as Doug just mentioned, today, to get feedback on whether either a new pipeline is valid or a change to pipeline is valid, the only time you actually get feedback that, yeah, this is working as expected is when you commit and push your code to GitLab. And as Dov saying, people would love a way not to have to go through the extra step, which takes time, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, especially think about like you have like really large pipeline, it can take like 40 minutes, an hour, and you want to test a couple of the jobs, so you need to push and you need to wait for this whole thing to happen. You can maybe comment out few jobs, but it's a lot of overhead for our users. And there is like one part of that things can people can get confused. We do have a linter, and like the linter is testing the validation. It is validating the configuration of your pipeline, but still, our pipeline can be dynamic. And when you test the pipeline, you test like the whole configuration. But when you run the pipeline, and like correct me if I'm wrong, like the runner gets like the job, but the we are processing the pipeline differently. So there are jobs that are getting created, and some jobs will not get created. And so those pipelines can be dynamic. And of course, if you're using like the rule syntax, if you are pushing like merge requests, if you are on different branches, so pipelines can behave differently. So even if it's the same configuration, the same pipeline can fail and the same pipeline can succeed based on specific conditions. So our linter is not the silver bullet that will solve the problem to our users. The only way for them to absolutely know if the pipeline will work is to run it somehow. And the only way they can do it today is run it to our GitLab CI, and they don't want it because of what Darren just mentioned.
And Dov, who are these people? Who are the personas specifically that have this problem today?
Yeah, so mainly we are talking about when I spoke with users, we're talking about like Priyanka, which is the platform engineer, and Devon, the DevOps engineers that needs to debug and the pipeline.
I'm so impressed that you know the user's personal offhand. That's just impressive.
Yeah, I have to say that I just ran an opportunity canvas on both of them. So this is why I remember. Tomorrow I'll forget.
And here you talk about some example solutions and workarounds, right? What you have today. Can you also talk about further what the ideal outcome would be for Priyanka and for Devin?
Oh, I'll let Dov answer the second part because he's probably had the most recent conversations with customers about kind of like what their ideal outcome would be. I'll just talk a little bit about the first piece, which is like the example solution. So for everyone that doesn't really know, today there is this capability in GitLab Runner called GitLab Runner Exec, which was a feature from many moons back, right? And that GitLab Runner Exec feature does allow you to do some type of pipeline debugging locally, but it's a feature that you can see as I say here in a very tongue-in-cheek type of way, was that what in my mind should have been deprecated a long time ago. We tried deprecating it, but everybody was howling that we didn't have a replacement solution. Personally, I wish it was not in the runner type feature. And so today, there are a couple different solutions, but this specific one is using the limited capabilities that are still there in GitLab Runner Exec to at least get to being able to debug pipelines locally. And the one example I share, this one article, as you scroll through it, in the end of the article, the blog post individual mentions, well, oh, here are the limitations because GitLab Runner Exec doesn't support all of GitLab's very cool new pipeline features. And so here's how you kind of work around it. So summarize, we've got this thing called GitLab Runner Exec. It's kind of something that did a little bit of this, and people are kind of working around it. And there's just one example. And Dov, you want to answer the question about the ideal outcome you think users might want?
Yeah, I can only guess, okay, because we didn't go to do any solution validation, and this is like one of the hardest problems that I have, like, because I have like no idea how we can like solve this problem. Like for me, I think the ideal solution will be like some sort of a CLI that you just like run some GitLab run or some basic command, and you pass some parameters. Like ideally you can like omit or run only specific jobs within a pipeline. Let's say you want to test like job number 3 out of like 10 pipelines or whatever, or maybe the entire pipeline, but it will run the pipeline locally on your instance, and will not need to trigger this whole CI mechanism. Maybe it's with like some sort of a local runner that we have. Maybe it's an extension for the GitLab runner exec. I have no idea. I actually didn't knew about this workaround in the solution, and I assume that some of our users don't know that as well. But yeah, I mean that's one of the hardest challenges that I've faced, because when I ask user, okay, what do you want? Like what's the ideal solution? It was very hard for them to articulate what they want, because like yes, we have a linter, and yes, we can do different things, but it was very hard to understand what will be the ideal solution for them.
And now, from a technical point of view, do you have any insights on the challenges today that would, I know there's tough because you don't have that visualization, but the challenges that will be in place with, for example, having this a local runner, a Exec or a CLI in place for users?
Yeah, I can start. I mean, on a higher level, one of the initial challenges, regardless of how you solve this, like one of the challenges is that we have a number of capabilities in GitLab CI, right, in terms of what we can do with a pipeline. And the question is, depending on whatever the solution is, do you copy and do you replicate all of those capabilities? So if you look at the dichotomy in terms of like the existing solution, GitLab Runner Exec, is that the team started adding those capabilities into GitLab Runner and stopped, because guess what? The pipeline feature sets got so complex. It didn't make sense to replicate GitLab CI and yet still in an application. So that's one of the challenges, is that if you do define whether it's a CLI approach, And we can get to this in your other question, Hayan, in terms of what's happening in the market. But for example, GitHub Actions, there's this thing for GitHub Actions called Act, which is basically a local CLI I was just reading about. But what they're doing with Act is not every single feature and capability in GitLab, in GitHub Actions is available for you to debug or test in Act. So you end up with how much of the, again, one of the key questions is in my mind, whatever solution you choose is, are you going to be able to debug 100% of the features and capabilities that are available in GitLab pipelines in this solution? To me, that's one of the hardest parts of this.
I think another aspect, not from the technical perspective, but like from the product positioning, is that like eventually this solution is a product by itself. And I think that, you know, once and if we'll have something like that, we'll keep getting requests for customers. As you mentioned, there will be some limitation, and those customers will ask, okay, can you improve that? And now we wanted to do more things. So it will have like a life of its own. I'm not sure like how exactly are we going to package it and license it and all of that, but that's like also another discussion that we need to have, like once we will you know, understand all the rest of the challenges that we might have. But this is like another challenge that it's important to call out even today.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because regardless of that's a great point, because regardless of how you approach this, right, in order to debug something, you need an execution environment, whether it's your host computer, a Docker container, right? You need something to execute those commands. And that's I mean, you could potentially come up with something where you are not creating a CLI or creating yet still a fluid product, but then the question of where is the code being executed so that you are debugging it happening. You have two choices, a local system or back in the cloud. So I think, yeah, that's a really tough problem, to be honest.
Vidika, you had a comment in the agenda?
Yeah, I was quickly scanning through an article I read by CircleCI, and I think this is one of the use cases for their CLI as well, like to validate the config file syntax. But like I said, one of the use cases, the CLI is also used for a range of other things. So that just makes me wonder, like, just for the sake of validation, working on something as complex as a CLI, how feasible that would be.
Vitka, you mean how feasible it would be for us to create a new CLI, kind of similar to CircleCI?
Yeah, so what I see is that, I mean, this is just one of the uses for a CLI. And of course, a CLI can do a lot more, right? So either like if we move in that direction, do we also envision expanding the range of things that users could do with the CLI? I mean, that would be great. Yeah, that would of course be nice.
I have like something that regarding that, like we mentioned the linter. So a common ask with our users is to provide a linting capability to the CLI. So if you're asking like, how can we expand it? So just doing the linter, we have an API, okay? But the problem is that this API, you need to like paste the entire YAML configuration in order to pass it through. And users, again, would like something simple, like, you know, GitLab CLI and pass the name of the YAML, and you get like failed, like succeed, valid or invalid configuration. Like that's what they want. Like even like the basic thing, this like basic thing that they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like one enhancement we can do with or use case with the CLI. And I'm sure that there are more.
I'm very sure there are more. That's right. So yeah, I totally support that idea.
So since you talked about CircleCI, maybe we should jump to the next question, right? How can we differentiate from existing solutions in the marketplace?
Well, let's see. Well, GitHub is kind of new to the game. I only started just browsing this morning in terms of what GitHub has, and I only just came across the one article. I don't know if they have anything official, which is again this kind of act thing. So I think they're new. I think Circle CI I'm sorry, the Circle CI CLI option, the Leviticus point is one pattern, and again that's still kind of like I still have to have the CLI installed locally. I think Travis has the ability for you to SSH into the virtual machine that's executing your pipeline jobs on their system. So it's kind of like they need to do some kind of testing, right? So but you're still, of course, reliant on executing the pipeline and logging into that, you know what I mean? That machine to debug it. So again, I haven't really done that deep of like analysis in terms of what the competitors are doing. In my simplistic mind, I was kind of thinking about like when I'm working on, say, it's really a bad example because again, this is happening locally, right? But like say I'm in my Visual Studio Code UI IDE, sorry, and I maybe like testing out something with Go. I can do everything within that IDE, but the problem with that example is obviously the IDE is compiling my Go code on my local laptop. But from a user perspective, I'm still within the IDE interface. Yeah, I think for me, it would be like, can I do it within the interface I'm in versus having to go to somewhere else would be interesting. That's just my point of view. I don't know if anyone else has a different point of view.
This is a very complex problem. This is giving me a headache just to understand a little bit.
Really fast on that point, I should have found something. I think Peyton, is it Peyton? I think Peyton shared like a Visual Studio extension that he built, but I'm not sure exactly what it does. I haven't looked at it in a while. I'll try to find it.
I think there is also a repo in GitHub. This one, GitLab CLI, GitLab CI is called. And basically, it's kind of like something that one of the users created, and it says like, why? Because I didn't want to commit, push, and wait for my job to run in the GitLab UI to figure out I forgot to install make before running make build, for instance. So
So this is very interesting because it goes back to both Vitka's point about the CLI, but then also Dov's point. It's like, okay, if the solution is like a CLI, then to Dov's point from earlier on, you're now like, okay, a different product to maintain.
Let's take a step back. Let's start thinking small, right? Because now we're like going the direction where we think, okay, this can be potentially a different problem. But if we think a bit smaller, what is the hardest part of this problem that we have to solve before we can even consider thinking about an MVC or thinking about a problem that we want to validate directly?
Hey, Miguel, you're a dev. What's the hardest problem for a dev? Let me hear from you. Put Miguel on the spot or we lost him? I'm not sure which one.
Yeah. I'm trying to get more backend engineers people here to join. Oh yeah. So, do you have any ideas from your perspective?
For me, the hardest problem is, again, the execution environment. Where do you debug? If the problem is debugging the pipeline so that I validate that it's working correctly before pushing to a GitLab instance, to me, the biggest question is, where does the debugger run?
I also think that in terms of UI, thinking about, if we ever talk about um, debugging this through the interface through web IDE, I'm not thinking where would this leave, but what will be the flow for people, for users to get to the point where they are debugging there, and how would that interaction would overlap with what we offer today in the web IDE? That's an awful question, but it's a very, very blurry line. Can you talk today a bit, Darren, about, because I think you mentioned Visual Studio, right? So can you imagine, like, if you're looking at it and thinking in your head, what were the problems that you think you would encounter when debugging that through the UI, through the web IDE?
Yeah, I was just actually, as you were mentioning, I was thinking about kind of simplifying the thought process, which was, you have a couple different things, right? So like in the example, I'm going to get to your question. I'm just kind of thinking through here. In the example for GitHub, that blog post where the person is showing how they're using this ACK thing to debug it, right? And the question is, what's our definition of debugging a pipeline? Is it just making sure, like for the linter, all the linter today is just validating that the syntax is correct, right? At a high level, it's just syntax, right?
And the configuration.
And the syntax and config, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we've got syntax and config. So what's the next step? Well, that the actual workflows stitched together. I guess you're covering that with config. So I guess for me, what is the definition of debugging? Are we trying to say that if I define a pipeline with 3 jobs in them, I want to ensure that all those jobs will run?
So I'll explain. So the linter, if I'm running like a set of commands and those commands fail, the linter won't check that, because the linter will say, okay, the configuration is right. There is like a bunch of scripts that is running. They don't know the outcome of the script. Okay, they don't know if it turns out like exit 0 or exit 1, because it is not executing anything. Just like, I guess, again, guessing. We have some rules that they are checking, some dependencies, and I'm oversimplifying it. Of course, it's very complex, but it is not like debugging and checking if the job passed or succeed. It is just saying, hey, yes, the job can run, but we don't know like what would be like the outcome of the job. And this is what they want to see. They want to see that the job build finished successfully, and not wait for like to install, to set up, and do all those things in our CI. They want to run it locally. They want to run like only only test job. Okay, I want to run only test job to see if like those 3 commands that I just set up works, because like in every job we can like build things from scratch. We can run like npm install and all of that in each and every job. And assuming I need to go through like, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 different jobs, then I guess I need to install it every time, and it takes a lot of time. And I want to check only job number 5 out of 6, for instance, or something like that.
Dov, in the example you just mentioned, when a user wants to test, let's say a build job or a test job, they want to do this against an actual commit from their repo. So they want to actually run the test script against their code, or it's something like a dry run. They just want to make sure the tests goes to the next step.
I think it's both, and I think it's okay if it will be like a dry run, like as an MVC, and then after that, like with your like real against your real code. But we cannot provide either.
Right. I ask because if we're talking about some sort of local environment that the users can run against their code, then if the local environment that runs their code is very complex, then it could be really difficult to make sure all users were properly supported with this. I'm thinking of like huge Perl environments, for example, they're really hard to run on a local machine.
Yeah, I mean, I understand it, but like even like testing a simple command, echo. Okay, I just want to test like echo 0. Okay, we cannot do that. Even this, something that is not supported. I'm not talking about even a complex environment.
Vitika?
Yeah, that was just a small effort to crunch everything that Dov said into something like, what could we call it? Like, could we call it that we want to do a very quick mock execution of the configuration using the solution?
Maybe that's our next step, right? What do we need to check? What do we need to validate from a technical point of view? And what are the riskiest assumptions we've made from what we're talking about here that, if not true, would cause this to fail? So we know that it will be very difficult to support this execution in a smaller and local environments. But what else would be a risk for this solution, for this problem in general?
I think what Daniel said earlier is also a risk, which is, I guess, suggesting it does said, hey, simple pipelines are easy, but then Daniel's suggesting more complex workflows are very, very risky, because then we get into a situation, if you had a solution, do you really support all these more complex workflows?
Yeah, we could run into an issue that if it's a product that runs on the user's machine, then they can say it doesn't work on my machine, so the product doesn't work. Darren, you had mentioned earlier about possibly supporting a subset of features of the CI. I think another risk is choosing what the subset will be in a way that is useful for specific workflows or specific personas. Because again, depending on what we pick, we might not be properly supporting anyone, or at least not well enough.
Yeah, Vitika?
Yeah. So I think one risk that we, at least I am assuming here, is that the solution might be too elaborate and require a lot of effort.
Maybe Darren has an opinion.
I'll let Dov handle. I just jumped another call. Sorry, chaps, folks. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, I think like supporting this. I mean, if this is something that the GitLab is offering, then we need to support it. And as Daniel mentioned, it will be very hard to make sure it is running on different environments. I mean, number of permutation can be a lot. So it will be hard to support it with like the different variation that our users are running. I mean, we can say, hey, we can clearly mention what we support, but still there will still be like some cases where we fall short, and that's a risk that I can see.
And what can we do the next milestone towards validation and outcome and MVC, just to keep the conversation going for this topic? I think maybe we all agree that the problem is too complex, maybe too large to define an MVC or any deliverables.
It's a complex problem. I think like we'll need engineers' insights. I think that the MVC can be like writing this whole thing that we just on an issue and tag like specific members of like both runners and CI, basically all verify, I think, and ask for their opinion, because that's a problem that our engineers also have, or our DevOps also have. And like maybe some of them have some ideas on the possible solution. So it will be a good topic to bring up in like, I don't know, think big of section, but maybe also like tag specific engineers and ask for their opinion on that.
Yeah, like engineering, a technical validation, and getting maybe the current scenarios, right? What are they doing today to solve this problem? And you detailed that a little bit in the beginning, but also knowing the technology and knowing the constraints. What would they? What would be the lowest hanging fruit that would have I would say the biggest, largest impact to them? There could also be some questions in this issue.
I think another question would be, and maybe this is a topic for different discussion, if we want to support GitLab CLI commands, like something officially. I know that GitHub launched something recently. And do we want also to compete with that and have something similar? And like one, it's a simple thing that we can do, for instance, is just to do the validation, not through an API, but through like a CLI call.
The problem validation, you mean?
Yeah, even the solution validation. The problem is well known, I think, like for solution validation. But again, that's something that we need to think. Do we want to move toward that direction? So maybe, you know what, maybe problem validation first. Yeah, you're right.
We're probably going to leave this call with many more questions than we had before we joined. So we can already draft some. I think for me at least, it's fine to wrap up and draft some action items. How do you folks feel about this discussion? Okay, wrap up on next steps. Usually after these questions, after these sessions, we have a few to do. So here, we need more engineering sides. We need a discussion involving the verify backend engineers. We need PMs also involved. So I think an obvious next step would be to create an issue to continue this conversation, I think, and draft, right, and define this problem, define the scope of the questions that needs to be answered, and identify some people of contact in the teams. And Dov, do you have any names in mind, or just in general backend engineers from Verify?
Yeah, there are like few folks that we can ping. Obviously, Regosh and Camille, and also I think the entire basically pipeline authoring and CI backend engineering team.
Mm-hmm. So I know that there is gone, but usually Dov, the person that brings the topic is the one that creates this issue. So I will assign this to you, so you can also, you have all the technicalities yet is in your head, and you can create that issue and label the issue with the think big, think big label, so we can follow the conversation and we know the outcome from this meeting.
You can mark this action item on, no problem.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. Anything else, folks? How do you all feel? This was tough.
That's a hard problem. I mean, I didn't thought we'll have like an answer here, but this is something that me and Darren discussed, and he said yes, his users also bring this a lot, and my users bring it a lot, and this is like one of the only questions that we don't have any answer. So even surfacing it and knowing that it's okay that we don't have an answer is something that, again, it's like a step in the right direction for me, because it's not like something easy to build. And yeah, but I'm okay with the action item, and like hopefully we can move forward with an ASIC discussion, and if we need, we can do like another sync call with more people involved, and we'll see. more comments on the issue.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, good read only, but Daniel, do you want to voice your comment before we wrap up? Anything else you or other folks want to say?
Yeah, it was just a quick comment. I think it would be nice to think of opportunities to improve perceived performance for our users, perhaps in ways that we don't really need to change how our backend works or create a lot of new APIs or CLIs, but rather just breaking down small pieces that make it seem faster, right? Don't know if I have an example in mind, but it's just a thought.
I have example. This is a good discussion. I think it's a separate conversation, because even if we will speed the pipeline, still user would like, first of all, user always like speedy pipelines, regardless of this problem or any other problem. So and like I would say, the smallest things we can do is to provide in our documentation best practice on how to speed your pipeline. For instance, using a cache to speed your pipeline, using images like locally instead of pulling them from Docker Hub can speed your pipelines. What else? I think like if you're using like the before script and after script, it can speed up your pipelines. Like there are like multiple ways. You run parallel jobs, you speed your pipeline. So we can probably, and as I mentioned, it's a topic for a different discussion, but it's an important one. We can probably list out like all the best practices that all of us know in our engineers, in even like one page in our documentation, and then provide some sort of a link from the product. Hey, you want a speedy pipeline? Even as the pipeline process, because when the pipeline process, it's a nightmare. I mean, nobody sit and look at the pipeline processing. You hit the pipeline and you go, you do something, and you come back, you see it keeps spinning, and you like, you want to throw yourself from the window. But I mean, if you have like a link, do you want to run your pipeline faster? You want a speedy pipeline? You click there, you see like best practices on how to do different things. As I mentioned, this could be like a good MVC of that.
Awesome. Well, if anyone has any other points to think of, maybe when you have that issue, you can just loop us in the ops channel, and then any other comments can be added there in the thread, and then we can continue the discussion asynchronously. Yeah.
Yeah. The only comment is I will do it probably on Sunday, so it will be like a week, like next week.
Don't worry.
Because I'm wrapping up for today.
Yeah.
And for the week.
Take your time. Awesome.
Cool.
Thanks everyone for joining. If you have any questions, as I said, feel free to use the ops channel in Slack, so we can continue the conversation. And thank you. Yeah, thanks for joining. Thanks for participating.
Thanks.
See you later.